What do you say there, you bunch of gothed out teenagers and everyone else who loves Tim Burton? Alright, everyone, we're getting well into the spring season. Grills are lighting up, sprinklers are watering lawns, and pollen is absolutely assaulting my sinuses. So, I was thinking about what movie I could talk about that immediately invokes thoughts of springtime. And what movie makes you think of spring more than Edward Scissorhands? Of course! We got Edward trimming bushes into wacky shapes, that iconic barbecue scene. This is absolutely 100% the time of year people think about when they think of Edward Scissorhands. Am I right? Anyway, like countless millennial children, I loved this movie growing up. However, as I grew into adulthood, there was one aspect of the story that I started to question. Did Jim deserve to die in the end? Now, let me clarify. By the end of the movie, Jim is attacking Edward in an attempt to kill him. He is using lethal force, and Edward uses lethal force in return to defend himself and Kim. Judging by this instance alone, yes, Jim brought this fate upon himself. What I'm more interested in is, within the context of the story, did Jim's actions and their consequences justify this final climax? I'll be honest, anytime I watch this movie, I can't stand Jim. He's arrogant, entitled, manipulative, and abusive. But he's also a teenager, and that's not a justification or an excuse, it's just relevant context. I remember a few years ago I was recording an episode on my buddy Matt's podcast, Film Feast. We got on the topic of Edward Scissorhands, and we both thought this was a really dark climax to what is, for the most part, a whimsical modern fairy tale. But then I guess most original fairy tales have pretty gruesome endings. But if you think I'm crazy for even asking this question, don't just listen to me. What about this guy?
The movie ends with a fight to the finish where one character dies, and that's how a lot of movies end these days, not with people working out their problems or getting to know each other, but with somebody getting killed, and death is the solution. I guess it's easier to write death than dialogue, and so the new motto is, better dead than said. Edward Scissorhands left me depressed and disturbed.
Okay, I love Roger, and God rest his soul, but I think he went a little overboard about the movie being depressing and disturbing. Even though I myself was scared to watch it when I was really little, as I've established, I was a wuss as a kid. But my point remains, I'm clearly not the only person questioning this. So I decided, why not count out all of Jim's egregious acts and see if the ending was justified? I'll touch on a few other plot points, but this video will mostly focus on Jim and his actions. Before I get to him though, I'll give you a quick recap of the story before he shows up. I'm sure most of you know it. Peg, the Avon lady, goes up to that spooky mansion and finds this Hot Topic employee, robot man with scissors for hands. She brings him down to her suburban neighborhood to live with her family, and all the neighborhood ladies, especially this one here, are totally enamored with him. He trims bushes into topiaries, everyone thinks he's really cool and interesting. There's plenty more to the story, but if you haven't seen the movie, what are you doing watching this video? Go and check it out! Okay, so Kim and her boyfriend Jim come back home late at night from their camping trip, and we get our first hint that Jim might not be the most upstanding young man.
My parents have the alarm set. I'm screwed. I'll just sleep in the yard again.
I told you to call them and tell them that we're coming back early.
Alright, so we learn that Jim's parents are quite protective of their property. I wonder why. They have this whole security system, and they chose not to share the deactivation code with their son. By the way, I know this was before cell phones were super common, but can Jim not just knock on the door or ring the doorbell? Would so much as that set off the alarm? Okay, nothing done on camera as of yet, but I've got my suspicions about this guy. Later on, Kim, Jim, and their friend, whose name I don't think we ever learn, are walking through the neighborhood when that lovably awkward Edward yells for Kim.
Kim!
Oh no.
Jim teases her about it and lifts her up, making fun of both her and Edward. It's immature and bullying, but standard fare for teenage boys. Again, not an excuse, just context. Later on, they're all having dinner together when Kim's friend makes this nasty comment.
I can't eat that. He used his hands. I don't think it's sanitary.
Screw you! They're scissors, and I'm sure he washed them before dinner. Anyway, Jim is being fine here. He complains a bit about his parents, but nothing terrible. You want to talk about an egregious act? You know I love Edward to death, but he starts trimming this lady's dog without asking her. But she ends up loving it, so I guess it's okay. So Edward starts trimming all the neighborhood dogs and all the ladies' hair too. Also, not for nothing, but this lady's haircut makes her look like Mandy from The Grim Adventures. Okay, what else is Jim doing wrong here? PDA? How dare you? I don't really care. But you know what I do care about? Kim forgets her key to the house and the couple is locked out, only for our new Superboy Edward to come and save the day and pick the lock. Yeah, Jim praises him for it, seems like a nice guy, but then this dude asks him to basically serve as watchdog for Kim's mom so he can go and oh, you know what he's going to do. Alright, this next scene is where Jim really starts getting on my nerves. Edward has become a bit of a local celebrity and goes on this daytime talk show. An audience member asks if he has a girlfriend. Of course, Jim takes this opportunity to tease Kim about it. But then, a freak accident happens when Edward snips a wire and is electrocuted, and Jim just thinks this is the funniest thing in the world.
I wish we'd been taping that. I'd give my left nut to see that again.
You're a weird guy. Okay, so Jim just annoyed me big time, but now he's actually getting bad. He wants to break into his parents' house to steal some of his dad's sweet tech and pressures Kim to get Edward to help them pick the locks. As they approach the house, he lies to Edward that it was the house of someone who stole from him. Then, when the alarm goes off, he and his crew bail as he forcibly takes Kim with him so that they can let Edward take the fall for everything. Things get sorted out and Edward is released from jail. And of course he doesn't rat anyone out because he's an absolute angel. Oh yeah, and all the neighborhood ladies turn on him instantly, but a part of that is also because that one thirsty lady starts lying about him. But anyway, Kim is talking to Edward about the whole ordeal when he drops this bombshell on her.
I knew it was Jim's house.
Well, then why'd you do it?
Because you asked me to.
Jim rolls up like everything is all hunky-dory. Kim chews him out for what he did and he tries pushing the blame on her. I mean, yeah, Kim could have done the right thing, but no, I want to be mad at Jim. So then Kim and Peg are decorating for an unrelated holiday, and this is still totally a spring and summer movie. But then Kim goes out and we get the most beautifully whimsical scene in the whole movie. Only to be interrupted by this freaking guy. So once Jim yells, Edward is distracted and accidentally scratches Kim's hand. Jim proceeds to verbally assault Edward until he runs away. He then attempts to gaslight Kim into blaming Edward, but she ain't having any of it and breaks up with him then and there. Oh boy, looks like Edward is getting a little jaded at this point. So Peg tells Kim that, in retrospect, maybe it's best for Edward to stay up in the mansion, where he's safe. Take note of this, by the way. But Edward comes back to the house one more time, Kim greets him, and then this happens.
Hold me.
I can't.
Then we see Jim, being super possessive of Kim, encourage his friend to drive drunk just to take him back to her house, and oh man, this leads to an infuriating series of events. You see, at this same time, Kim's little brother Kevin is also walking back home and Jim's drunk friend nearly runs him over. But Edward, being the god among men that he is, rescues Kevin. Then, as he's checking on the kid's well-being, he happens to scratch his face a little bit. All of the neighbors only see this part of it and assume Edward is attacking him. And Jim takes this opportunity to attack Edward so that he can look like the hero. Okay, so after this, you know how it ends. Edward runs back home to the big old mansion, the neighborhood follows suit, but Kim gets ahead, and oh, apparently so did Jim, because he shows up ready to kill. They get into a scuffle, Kim threatens Jim herself, he smacks her across the face, and by now, Edward is just fed up with Jim's bullcrap.
Stay away from her!
Yep, and then this happens.
Goodbye.
Okay, so I know I skipped a lot of the movie, but I really wanted to focus mostly on Jim and all of his evil doing. I think I've made it pretty obvious. I hate Jim. And yet, I don't know, it still seems like a big finish to the character in the entire context of the movie. If it weren't for that final scene in which he's straight up attempting murder, I'm not sure it was necessary. I feel like in movies like this, things would normally end with a character like Jim getting arrested rather than killed. Maybe there'd be some way of proving he put Edward up to the break-in, he would be taken away in cuffs, and Edward still chooses to go back home, because he's just not meant for this world. It may be sappier, but part of me would feel more satisfied, because I'd want everyone to admit that they misjudged Edward and apologize to him. But even if we have to kill off Jim, maybe it could have happened differently. I'd recommend the Hack the Movies review of this movie. Their host Tony suggested that you could rewrite it so that Jim gets himself killed. And I agree. Maybe he'd grab a piece of lumber and run at Edward, Edward jumps out of the way, and Jim falls out the window. Or maybe he could charge at him and Edward would turn at just the wrong time so that Jim is accidentally impaled by his hands. That way, Edward is still the one to finish him off, but he didn't actually try to kill him. It could have gone different ways. However, Tony's co-host Crystal countered with an argument that I've heard before, that Edward's killing Jim may be a representation that encountering humanity is what tainted his innocence. And I think this goes back to Peg's comment that it's best for him to go back where he's safe. Not just from the cruelty of the neighbors, but from the corruption of the world. You know, I still don't get why they reviewed this one in December, given that it's still totally a spring and summer movie. Okay, listen, I had the idea for this video for a long time and I didn't want to wait until December to talk about it. Are you happy now? I admit it. But anyway, the ending may be melodramatic, but what else do you expect from Tim Burton? Edward Scissorhands is still a classic that I absolutely love. A sentimental tale with great visuals that all of us awkward kids could relate to. I've been Kenny Steps. Take it easy, and keep stepping into the movies.